Hey there, Georgie here with Ukraine Matters. Welcome to Panic Reporting Frontline Update. Because I got my inbox full of messages spamming for the whole yesterday, and even moderators of this channel have been writing me saying, it's like, Georgie, please say something. We cannot take it anymore. This is really bad. So let's talk about the situation on the front lines and let's talk whether or not Ukraine is done for and the situation is collapsing. So what is happening in this situation? Well, in a nutshell, nothing new. Russia has been advancing and is continuing advancing on the southern direction of Ukraine. And it's just people find another swing of the pendulum from Ukraine is winning, Russia is shit, to now again to the area everything is lost, Ukraine is completely lost, and we're just now in another this public spiral where people are losing their shit. This whole event was triggered by the sudden situation that was discovered by a lot of people, I guess, online, that Ukraine is having trouble on their southern direction. The direction which from the start of the year was probably the most problematic one. It was direction that was just south of Pokrovsk. This was the direction where Russians have been advancing the most. During this whole year, specifically this area right over here was where Russia had the biggest gains in land captured from Ukraine. It was problematic area this whole time. And the reasons for that was very simple, because Ukraine right now, the current modern warfare they're fighting around, not, I don't want to say major settlements because we don't have as many of them, but at least somewhere where they can have some kind of urban settlements. And this area is very sparsely populated. In this area, there is literally just small settlements and then a big nothing in between them. It has been outlined as a problematic area from the get-go. As soon as Russians went through Marinka and then they were able to take Kurakheve, that is when, with the additional fall of Avdiivka and moving towards Selidove, when it was outlined that Russians now basically opened this whole southern front line that they will be able to go through. Even if I watch my older videos from a couple of years ago, I explicitly state that this will be the outcome of Ukraine losing Avdiivka and Marinka. More specifically, what is happening is that in the last couple of days or last week, Russians were able to rapidly advance past this river that they were stuck around, and it was used by the Ukrainian armed forces as a natural barrier to prevent Russian forces advancing. They were able to cross the river and go all around the Ukrainian defensive positions in the area, and they were able to quickly capture some of these settlements and even capture Rivnapilya. And this is interesting because a lot of the people assumed that this is happening because Ukrainians are just collapsing, again, as it was discussed by the propaganda, not propaganda, but the panicking sources. And this opens Russia quite a lot of options to basically get until the next sort of a river and even attack the Hulyai-Pole, which is located right here in the south. And this is main sort of a defense hub that Ukrainians are having to contain the whole Russian southern flank, and essentially Russia will be able, by capturing Rivnapilya, to collapse this whole sector. And this is the case. And a lot of people were instantly assuming that this is because Ukrainians are just been overrun and they're collapsing. But it turns out it's not the case. And actually, even deep state, that is pretty commonly critical of Ukrainian armed forces, especially of the systematic problems that we're going to still talk about today in the Ukrainian armed forces, they actually stated that it is quite interesting that it was not just that Russia captured these villages, that compared to some of the previous ways how Ukrainian armed forces were operating, forces actually were withdrawn in an organized fashion. And this is very different from what we see in a lot of other places from the front line. Now, is it bad? Oh, absolutely. But this is not bad in a sense that, oh my God, everything is lost. This is in a sense that the direction that we're talking about here has been bad this whole year. it has been having these systematic problems nonstop. By about midsummer, we had the main commanders of this direction replaced, and it sort of helped a little bit, but then it didn't really help a lot. And in generally, we knew that Ukraine is picking their fights and choosing their fights mostly because of the issues within the how many people Ukraine has. And that's the systematic problem that we talked about. Again, I made a whole video with regards to the problems in Ukrainian military. And this direction was specifically sort of under prioritized. It is clear that Ukraine has been heavily focusing to secure and fight for the Sloviansk-Kramatorsk agglomeration. So they are trying to dedicate their resources to specifically prevent Russia from getting through these urbanized, heavily urbanized areas and make it as hard for Russia as possible. That's why we see quite a strong dedication of Ukrainian armed forces to fight for Pokrovsk. That's why we're seeing that Russia is struggling to move past Bakhmut. And that's why we're seeing that even in the Liman sector, there is still Ukrainians are dedicating a lot of forces. And even if Russia having some success, it is not getting them easily. But let's answer the question that everyone is here for, that how bad it is. Well, it is pretty bad. It is definitely something that is going to be problematic for Ukrainian defense lines. This whole attack from the east has been issue because Ukraine doesn't have the resources in the area, as I already explained. And more importantly, the positions that Ukraine had in the area pre-built, they were built mostly to defend against the Russians going from south to north, rather from northeast to west. And that creates a lot of issues for basically majority of these positions being flanked. But it's obviously not the main issue. The main issue is the aviation bombs, drones, and just generally the lack of personnel. And the systematic issue for Ukraine is much more important in this. The losing of territory is more sort of just as a consequence of existing strategic big systematic issues of Ukrainian military that we talked about extensively, and that is the constant issues of both not having soldiers and having to build all these mobilized army structures on soldiers that some of them don't even want to be there, some of them don't have any experience, and just a lot of incompetent personnel, and not having a serious sort of enough attitude in society where it is perceived that there are some in Ukrainian society that are just worse than others, and those that are worse must go and fight. And instead, if you're smart, you're either running away or stuff like this. Problems with messaging. There is a lot of these issues that Ukraine needs to solve. But if we're talking strategically, then this does not really change the equation for Ukraine at all. What was happening is still happening. Ukraine is trying to fight the asymmetric warfare. They're still trying to go after Russian economy. They are hoping they will find some kind of a solutions for a lot of the Russian aviation bombs that are now dominating and really helping Russians to advance. But more importantly, it is also clear that while Ukraine is trying to solve some of the issues in Ukrainian military, we talked about it extensively with the new contract reform that is coming, it is coming slow. And it is also plagued with some of the problems that we just discussed recently with corruption, with now 2 ministers that were supposedly involved in this case stepping down. It doesn't really help the case. It is challenging to have the country resist Russia, but Ukrainians, many good Ukrainians continue doing this. And this is why we're here. We are supporting those Ukrainians first and foremost. Not just because they are Ukrainians, but because Ukraine matters for us in Europe, because they are ready to, despite everything and all of the shit that is happening in their country, they're still able to sign up, and at least every month 30,000 of them going to the front lines to fight the Russians. That's in my book more than worth it. But the good news also are there. So for example, around Pokrovsk, we now get reports that Ukraine is continuing securing their positions around Rodinske. They were able to advance a little bit further towards east, And my hopes are that in some nearest news, we will hear that Ukrainians have taken control of Krasny Liman, which is located right over here. If this will be the case, then this actually sort of will finally vindicate Syrskyi's approach to the situation in Pokrovsk, where Ukrainians are still keeping presence in the cities. As removing Russians from Krasny Liman, they will be able to then supply the forces a little bit better, allowing Ukrainians to continue fighting Russians in Pokrovsk. We also get some really good news from Kupiansk area. Russians are reporting that Ukrainians are really increasing pressure on the Russians in Kupiansk. Again, I was hoping we're going to have a bit clarified information soon, but it is still not there. It is clear that Ukrainians have conducted a couple of counterattacks to try to undercut Russians in Kupiansk. They have been reported as successful, but what I'm thinking is that maybe they were just to prevent Russians from having success in Kupiansk rather than taking over this territory. In any case, it is still not completely clear what is happening in the city. So while it is colored red, I think it's more appropriate to, for now, consider it sort of a gray until we get more information. Another interesting development happened in the Supi region, and here Ukrainians actually were aware of the Russian tactics that they tried to do again, which is to use pipes to infiltrate the Ukrainian-controlled territory behind the enemy lines. Well, this time Russians are reporting Ukrainians were ready. So not only they were followed, as soon as the first Russians appeared from the pipe, they were instantly attacked by Ukrainians, and supposedly Ukrainians also conducted some strikes against the pipe itself. It is no surprise that Ukrainians are now a lot more aware of the pipe situation, and Russians have been trying to abuse this tactic for way too much, and now they are dead. I hope this gives you a little bit more clarity. Guys, don't swing on emotional pendulum. This war is tough. Ukraine is still the underdog, so seeing that Russia is advancing should not surprise anyone. Situation is tough for Ukraine. There's a lot of problems we talked about, but they're trying to do their best, and we're trying to support them so they do their best. The war have changed, is a lot more maneuverable because there is a lot of territory and not a lot of men on both sides, to be honest. And this gives options for Russians. Russia is much more willing to sacrifice their manpower, and this is what makes them dangerous, not just for Ukraine, for us. And that is why it matters for us to support and continue trusting in Ukraine, because they're doing whatever they can. I love you. Slava Ukraini, and I will see you next time.